how to make these neat items. The bird will be interesting to see how those are made.
Yes.
But, okay.
Sue, I don't think we're getting your mic.
Okay.
You got to do the switch. Here. It's on top. There you go.
Okay.
All right.
You are live.
Okay, basically what the birdhouse is a little box, except that you're going to glue it together so you don't get to open it unless you want to do a tight friction fit or a screw top and make a gift box out of it. The top is usually a little bit bigger around than the bottom so that you can get the overhang to make it look like a roof. And if you want to get into exotics, bottle stopper blanks work really well. But what I've been doing is using dowels that I got at Woodcraft. So I've done a lot of roofs out of the maple dowel, and this is a cherry dowel that I've used more on the bottoms. So the first thing I do, you find your center and put it between centers and put a tenon at one end so you can put it into the chuck, and then round it up and hollow. This is going to be a bottom. I do that first because then I do the tenon for the box on the roof, and the roof is made to fit the bottom that you've already turned. They didn't bring the knockout bar. Right in front? Ah, okay. I've been using this chuck, because it has the jaws that close down really tight, and everything on these winds up being really tight. I'll let someone else answer that question.
That's a Talon, strong old Talon. It's a one-way Talon. Strong old.
Well, we've got another one that's got long jaws on it like that. Now, even though the dowel should be round, I've found that some of them wind up awfully oval by the time they've dried. So once you get it in the chuck, you get to round it again just for good measure. Pay no attention to, they never do. So once it's rounded, it's time to hollow it. Now I generally do my hollowing with a round nose scraper, but if you prefer drilling it out or using something else, you're welcome to do that. And you have to watch for it deciding that it's not going to stay on center. So. This is cherry.
Hey, Sue, as an option, if you wanted to, you could drill that out too.
Yeah, you could.
Forstner bit,
Mm-hmm.
and then clean up the bottom.
Yeah.
these days you gotta start fooling us by putting left-handed threads on there.
Okay. Now we've hollowed it out to where I've put the line here. And I'll probably just put a round bottom on this one rather than going for some kind of a finial look. You'll notice that the wall is not particularly thin. There's a reason for that. Because you drill the holes at this point, and if you've got the wall too thin, then when you go to pull the drill out, it lifts the whole side of the experience. But I only did that once. So I use a 3/8 inch bit for the big hole.
That's for the bird, right?
That's, well, it's the access hole for the bird. And then for the perch hole, I use a 1/16 inch bit. And what that lets me do is use a toothpick for the perch, so I don't have to turn one. No, I buy toothpicks. And you can either do the perch directly below the other one or a little bit off to the side so you can see more of the hole when you've got the bird in there. And since 1/16 inch drills don't generally come with this kind of thing, I picked these up at Home Depot. Okay. Now we go back to the shape of things here. And it's handy to have this kind of end on it while you do this so that you don't knock it off. Now at this point, you would sand, finish if you choose to do it at this point. I'll do a little 80 grit gouge number on it, but I'm not going to make this like a finished piece. I've been sanding to 400 lately because I've lost the 600 sandpaper. I've noticed every time I go to someplace like the Irish Fest demo, I always come back missing a grade of sandpaper. Well, since one piece is turning and the other isn't, we must be separated. That'll need more sanding later, but it'll do for now. Now we switch to the roof model, which I had already turned the tenon on to save a little time. This one's a maple dowel, so it turns a little bit differently. This is where our tenon is going to need to fit. At least 5. So once again, we'll check for a round before we start hollowing or cutting our tenon. then we need to cut our tenon that'll fit into the bottom. Find my pencil here. See how far I have to go. A ways. Looks like we're about there. Yep, we're about there. I hollow the roof a little bit just to take excess weight off, but I don't go very deep because if you're doing that tall slope, you can create a sunroof that you didn't intend to. You don't have to be so careful about thicker walls here because you're not going to be drilling the roof. Now you have choices of all kinds of shapes up here. I've seen domes, I've seen a Christmas tree look, I've seen pagodas. There's the small one, the tall cone like that. So it's a matter of personal taste. It's not a specific shape for the roof. I may go for the dome tonight because I don't have any of those at the moment. I had one, but it sold at the Irish Fest. So. So the one last thing that has to be done on this side is to drill a little hole in the top so you can get the wire in to provide an attachment. I understand that guys who keep fish hooks around the house like to cut off the fish hook and use that as the attachment point. I'm more of a jewelry type person, so I would use wire and round nose pliers. Or in the case of these magic things, you can buy those at Michael's.
Called magic things?
They're basically just little brass. They use them for jewelry where you're going to slide a bead on there and do something with it. But it's got the little hole on it turned already at one end. And then once you cut it off, the balance of it can be rounded up on round nose pliers and used as the jumper ring to feed something through. So I've used a few of those. Now on finishing, it's basically whatever you like, and some of these are exotic woods. This is pink ivory, as is this, but this was done with Chromacraft wood dye markers, which I met at the Women in Turning thing in September at Arrowmont, and I liked what they did there, so I bought a set after I got home. These are also those wood dye markers. This one was the green of the wood dye marker, but then I added the iridescent paint over the top of it. So you have lots of options to make them look shiny or look more like wood or whatever you choose. Now we're going to do the flip chart talk about how you make the bird, since it may be a little difficult to see what I'm doing when I make the bird. Huh? The bird? I'm real careful when I come down to the cutoff there, because if it goes flying into wood chips, you're not going to find it real easily. Yeah, there's no magnet approach or anything you can use. So you start out with a thin dowel, like 1/2 inch to 3/8 of an inch, and then I usually cut it to a thinner size first, the direction of where I'm going to be going, and you make a head shape and a body shape, bigger at the shoulders than near the tail, and then the tail is going to be a bell shape. So you'll actually hollow this on the inside while it's still on the lathe. This will make the standard down tail. If you want more of an up tail, you can widen the bell, although you'll be limited by the width of the dowel that you use on how far that can go. And then on trying to size these, I originally was just eyeballing it, but I came to some conclusions about how you could guesstimate it. From the perch to the roof, is the maximum size of your bird. When you actually put the bird in place, you're going to tilt it on the side, so it's not going to fill the whole space, but it gives you approximately where you want to be with the bird. Then, once this is turned, you part it off here, and you go into the carving part, and first thing you do is you take off side of the tail and go as far as you feel like going on what you want your tail to look like. But I tend to use the tail to hold on to while I'm carving the face, and it gives me an orientation for the face. So I do the tail first. And I use a micro carver because I have one. Dremel tool works just as well. I use a bigger cylinder burr carving off the tail and a smaller one when I do the face. You can do the whole thing with the smaller burr. So what I try to do is get a beak on here. So I use this small cylinder burr on each side and then come in this way each side. And what sticks out at the end of that is going to be the beak. Then I round it off a little bit on these corners, but depending on how much of a rough carved look, you don't have to do too much smoothing off there. On the back side, where you're not seeing all the carving on the front, I usually do a little bit of a V here to separate the wings, and I do wings on the side so that there's a little bit of a hollow on each side, just to make it easier to define those things when you go into paint. So that's how these little birds were done. And we start with the little tiny dowel. Oop. I don't find it. This I don't turn a tenon on, I just tightened up the jaws on it. I generally use cherry because that carves really well and has a nice surface. Anything that has large pores is going to be a problem on a carving this size, so walnut and oak are not a good way to go. And I do not recommend Bolivian coffee wood for carving on any size. I didn't like that one. Now here I whip out my trusty Thompson 1/4-inch detail gouge because the bird is kind of small. And before I get started, I usually turn down to the general size that I'm going to use. This is trying to unwrap itself. Now, once I'm down to the approximate diameter I'm going to use, I mark off where I'm going to expect to do the tail and the shoulders and the head. The head has to run a little bit large when you first turn the blank because you want enough space that you're going to cut the beak out. Hollowing the tail, you have to have a pretty small tool, but it saves you time when it comes to carving. This, it's a Thompson 1/4 inch detail gouge. Yeah. Now an 80 grit gouge on this is going to be a bit too much for it, so we'll go with 320 for starters. And then we whip out our trusty Mike Thomas special thin parting gouge.
Did he sign that?
Well, he does have his label with Mike Thomas on the side.
It's worth more if you get him to actually have his website on there. Any ink. Maybe even Woodburn. It doubles in price.
You know, it could be a Chinese knockoff.
Well, not that side.
How do you call it? A genuine copy of the fake Thomas tool?
No, that's the real McCoy, right there, I'm telling you.
So, now we have our blank.
You gonna do some carving?
Yes. My tool's over here.
Okay, all right.
So, first we're going to go after the tail. I think we've lost the mic again. Doesn't get on well with taking the faceplate on and off.
Reminds me of a dentist.
Now, when you carve out the tail, leave a little bit of a flat spot. Can you see that at all? That was cutting head. Yeah, well, you have to hold on pretty tight to keep it from walking all over the place. You leave a little bit of a flat spot on the bottom there. That's going to be where you glue onto your post. Now, we're going to switch. This is the cutting head I was using.
I lost you. There we go. You walk to one side or the other.
Okay.
That is
So-
a Dixie Big special right there.
Yes. Well, it's the Dixie Bigs without the end cut off.
Yeah.
For those of you who've seen Dixie Beggs, she has one of these that you grind the end off so that you can work along a flat surface without affecting the flat surface. Now we go on to our little cylinder burr. And we switch from regular glasses to magnifiers, so I can actually see what I'm doing. I tried carving one of these once without the magnifier, and the results were pretty sad. Now we're going to go into the head, holding onto the tail If you get a little bit off to one side, it's not a problem because it just looks like the bird's head is turned. If you put it on the wrong side, then his head's on backwards. Let's turn that down a little bit. If you let these walk too much, you carve the beak off and then you do it again. Um, Now, once you've got the rough carving done, instead of sanding these, they use diamond bits, which lets you smooth things up quite a bit. Now this carving is still rougher than I usually take them to paint, but we can pass around all of the pieces. Yes. I've used the red dye and I've used red paint. But I have found that the red dye and the red paint don't go together. So you'll notice the red bird is sitting on something other than the red topped. And while we won't have a challenge in December, in January you can bring in anything that's left of any ornaments you turned while you were getting through the holidays. I turned my first one a couple of years ago, but I hadn't done a lot of them until earlier this year. I haven't so far, but I use tight bond too. No, nothing magic. You can't clamp them though. You have to hold them while it sets up. Yeah, the small birds, if you like the ones like this, these come from Craft Supplies in Utah. If you're going for a much bigger size, these you can get at Michael's and Joann's, Hobby Lobby. Someone told me they couldn't find that size at Hobby Lobby, but this came from Michael's. And I've seen some at Joann's that are almost life size if you're going for really big birdhouses.
Any last words of wisdom or tips that you can share with us?
Not that I can think of.
Have fun.
How heavy is it? Like, if you put those on a Christmas tree, does it bend it down pretty far?
Part of the reason that you hollow them out is so that they don't do that. Yeah, that's acrylic.
It is a birdhouse, you gotta provide some, covering or place for the bird to live, right? You gotta hollow it out.
Doesn't the acrylic paint make it look kind of plasticky? You know what I'm saying?
Well, the birds are done with the acrylic paint. The birds are done with acrylic paint. Most of the others I haven't used paint on the actual birdhouse. Some of them are just a plain wood with a clear finish. Some of them are exotic woods. And then I've used the dye on some of them and a clear finish over it, a wax finish or something. Well, the hole that goes up here you do after you've parted off, because there's no way to do it until you part off. The holes here you do before you get too thin on the bottom. Yeah, I didn't bring the Dremel tool with the thin drill that I use for those, because this is a much smaller than a 1/16 of an inch.
You drill all the way to where it's hollow on the inside?
No.
You just drill down enough
I just drilled down enough to get the top in with some glue.
Any last questions for Sue? Okay, well, thank you, Sue. Okay. Now. Oh, here we go. Testing, testing. Okay, here we go. Now we're live. All right, what we're going to do now is go through some announcements. Then we're going to have our annual election, and then we'll have a break for refreshments.